Hello and welcome to the Care It Out Sleep Show, a podcast for tired parents who are searching for a bit more sleep the caring way. I'm your host, Kerry Secker, infant sleep consultant, founder of my unique sleep approach, Care It Out, and your caring sleep supporter. I really hope you'll join me on my mission to get snores a settled night's sleep without the tears, training or techniques. I love talking about sleep and I can't wait to share my sleep subjects with you. My approach to getting you more sleep is simple, straightforward, but above all, it's got to make sense and feel best for you. Ready to get more sleep? Then let's get started. Hello, you are listening to the Care It Out Sleep Show. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Today on the show, I am joined by Stacey Zimmels from Feed, Eat, Speak. Stacey is an IBCLC lactation consultant and a feeding and swallowing specialist, sleep therapist. I think I've got that right, Stacey. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Kerry. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited.
No, I'm really excited. I know you are really super busy. If you don't follow Stacey on Instagram, I highly recommend you do. Her feed is amazing. There's always a little bit of nugget of information on there, something to look at. It is amazing. So I know how busy you are, but I am very excited. Did I introduce you okay there?
Yes, that's exactly my title and qualifications. Yeah.
Yay, amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show, Stacey. Tell us a little bit about Feed, Eat, Speak and about you, what you do, how you work with families. Tell us everything.
Okay, so I have an account on Instagram, Feed, Eat, Speak, where I share my expertise, I suppose, around all types of feeding, particularly breastfeeding, but I also have information about how you can feed your baby from a bottle, moving through to weaning, fussy eating, but also feeding difficulties and feeding challenges with my speech therapy sort of feeding specialist hat on. So that's my Instagram account, and the same business I provide support for families, one-to-one support, lots of online support, but also face-to-face in my London-based clinics, COVID dependent. And more recently, I've been doing some pop-up webinars. I also have a feeding blog on my website, which I think is going to be in the show notes. And I just really want to sort of share good quality, evidence-based information around feeding. I suppose the background to it is that I have two children, still quite small, nearly 5 and nearly 3. And certainly when I was sort of in the baby world, I found that there was a real lack of good quality information around feeding, and that's what prompted me really to start my account when Gabriel was a little one. So yeah, hopefully it's helpful to families.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely sound like you're a lady with many hats, Stacey.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just love your approach to it. Like, I'm very, very similar in my approach to sleep. Good quality information, clear, evidence-based. I think there's so much noise in the parenting world, and we live in an age, we were talking about this before, like we live in an age of information, which is really handy. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. I think actually it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it can feel so overwhelming. There's so much noise, so many different opinions, there's so many shoulds, what you must be doing. It's really tricky, I think, for a lot of families and a lot of parents to tune into what's working for them. So yeah, I'm all about that too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, when it comes to feeding, I'm sure you're the same with sleep. You know, look at where the source of your information is coming from. If you're looking for feeding advice, find it from a page that's run by a qualified feeding specialist, you know, with training and a background, and find the fit that works for you. You know, everyone's approach will be different, and how you parent your children will be different, you know, and specific to you and your family. So, you know, find your people, find your sources of information, and sort of stick with them if they work for you and they sound like they resonate with you.
Yeah, that's really important, finding somebody that resonates with you. And I think I do feel that this might not always happen, but I do think practitioners have a duty of care to stay in there to give advice that they are qualified to give. So, for example, I'm not qualified to offer feeding advice, so I very rarely touch and speak about feeding. If I do want to talk about that, I will talk to somebody such as yourself, Stacey, that is qualified to do so. So I think that's really important if you're looking for advice out there.
Yeah,
definitely. Cool. Well, today we are going to be talking about breastfeeding and sleep. It's definitely a massive parenting topic, and I thought it'd be really nice to go through it in, well, you mentioned doing this in chronological order. So starting at a newborn, how their sleep is, what the breastfeeding is like at that stage, and then go through it by age and stage. Is that okay?
Sounds fantastic. Yeah.
Amazing. So let's start with the newborn phase. Oh, just gets me broody just talking about it. What's happening at the newborn phase with breastfeeding? If you start, and then I'll crack on with the sleep bit.
I mean, certainly at the beginning, the baby is feeding a huge amount, and you're working to establish breastfeeding successfully. And funny when it comes to sleep, and I think you'll talk about it, but sleep can be a bit of a barrier in the first days, because babies are often sleepy when they're born, but also can have a touch of jaundice, and they're not that reliable in terms of waking up to feed when they're very, very little. And it's probably one of the sort of only times where you might need to wake your baby up to feed them. And also you may struggle to get them to feed reliably because they get so sleepy. And so I think probably at the beginning there, the first things that you're thinking about and those concerns is like, well, they're sleeping really well, so should I just let them sleep, or should I continue to feed them? I think as a rule of thumb, you're aiming for 8 feeds as a minimum in 24 hours, where you feel that your baby is awake enough to be transferring milk from one or both breasts, and you're offering both breasts. But that actually, if you're not achieving that, then you are looking at waking your baby in order to achieve that, both to make sure that they are fed and gaining weight, and also to make sure that you're stimulating the breasts and your breast milk supply, until you get to a place where they're reliably waking and feeding that number of times as a minimum, but very often much, much more. And also that they're gaining weight as, your health visitor or midwife would be expecting.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. You are completely like, every newborn is born naturally nocturnal, and that's often a bit of a shock for some parents. I think there's this expectation that babies are going to be born, they're going to get straight into this routine and start feeding and getting into that sleep routine straight away. But every single baby is born naturally nocturnal, because when they're in their womb, during the day, your movement would lull them off to sleep, and then at night time, safe, quiet, would come out and nourish from the placenta. And my biggest sleep tip for the first 3 months is it's hard not to, but try not to worry too much about the routine. I think we'll talk about that later, but try to get them to help with the circadian rhythm, and to help them, because newborn babies, when they are really sleepy and they're coming to the breast, they're going to find it very difficult to feed. Lots of natural light during the day, so open the curtains during the day, get fresh air in your house, open the curtains, get them out in natural sunlight as much as you can. I think babies, autumn and winter babies, will struggle more with this, especially we're based in the UK. It can be pretty grey over winter here, and that can be really difficult. But get them out as natural light as possible. Keep it noisy during the day as well. I think there's lots of myths around baby sleep, and one of them is I'll come back onto it, never wake a sleeping baby. I'll address that in a second. But I think one of them is that you've got to tiptoe around the baby and not make a noise. My suggestion would be to always I'm not saying go out and play like loud music around them. I'm not saying that at all, but it's okay to keep your normal noise, your family noise levels up, and keep that chatting going, because that can really help them. And talking to your baby when you're feeding them as well, that can help, make it a really nice time that both of you look forward to, and there's that interaction and that conversation with your baby, where they just look at you and coo at you, but that can be really helpful as well.
yeah, they sound like fantastic tips. And I suppose we should probably just on again, I guess, with the newborn phase, you know, the sort of intensity of both the amount that they feed day and night, and just quite how tough that can be in the time when you're physically and emotionally adjusting to giving birth, and the hormones that you have going around your body, and maybe a long or traumatic birth or labor. And then you're having this infant that seemingly, particularly in the night, may not want to lay on their crib, may have, longer periods of sleep actually in the day, but in the night. And it's probably a bit about what you're saying about the noise, and you can probably talk more about this, Kerry. But just to say that, having them skin to skin, having them on you, feeding them frequently, and my tips for the nights as well is, sort of sharing the load, so that when you're not feeding, you can have a bit of a nap, and maybe your partner can have the baby skin to skin for a while in the night, so that you can sleep for an hour or two in between that. But knowing that that's all really normal for your baby at that age and stage, as both the frequent feeding and the seemingly long periods where they need to be on you and want to sleep on you rather than sleep in their cribs, right?
Yeah, I hear that all the time, like so many messages sliding into my DMs. I've got a brand new baby. They just want to be on me all the time. They won't be put down. And again, a lot of it, I love that we're talking about what's normal and what's natural, because a massive part of my approach is talking about what's natural and normal. And it's completely normal for again, that expectation that you're going to have your baby, they'll go down in their crib or their cot, and they'll get into that routine straight away. They'll sleep independently from you straight away. I like that some, but not all rule. So some babies do that, but the majority won't do that. And it is completely normal and natural for your baby to want to be on you in those first 3 months, because they've spent 3 months inside of you. They just want to feel close. You're everything. No, you are their everything.
Yeah, and it's completely normal and natural to feel like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this. It's too intense. I don't want this. Like, I need to sleep. And I think, recognizing what's normal for the baby, but what's normal for the mum with those feelings, I think is also really important just to say and just to state. It doesn't mean that you're a bad mum or that, your baby's broken. It just means that, yeah, absolutely. If you do have a baby that needs to be on you, it is super intense and super hard, particularly in those early days and weeks. And it's okay to sort of acknowledge that. And I know that, my experience in mums groups, and when I had a baby just like that, who was my first after a traumatic birth and the whole thing, is that I could only hear the noise that was coming from the mums about how long their babies were sleeping at night and how they only woke up for 2 feet.
Yeah.
And the noise in my head was like, I can't put my baby down. I don't think they stopped feeding in the night, and that's super hard. Just to acknowledge that, really, that it would be normal to feel lots of feelings about how hard that might be for you at the beginning.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. I think sometimes I can get caught. I'm not a mother yet, and sometimes I think nobody can understand, even when you are a mum, nobody can understand what it's like for someone else, because it all feels differently. But yeah, I really thank you for that reminder. It's definitely something that I'm going to take into practice, and just acknowledging that it's okay to find it hard. I think a lot of the time my focus is, yes, I work with the families and it's a very holistic approach. I look at everybody, but I think sometimes a lot of my focus is on the baby. So I really appreciate that, Stacey, so thank you.
I can thank my daughter that didn't sleep for a very long time.
Everything's a massive learning lesson, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I just wanted to come back to the waking a baby up, because this is one, I've been writing a blog on this actually strangely this week, and it's come up again. So this is one of those there's lots of sleep myths when it comes to sleep. Loads. And this is one of those things that you hear all the time. You must never wake a sleeping baby. don't wake a sleeping baby. And I have to preface this by saying that I really dislike waking a sleeping baby. I think mainly because I spend so long sat at my desk getting the sore back and shoulders, trying to support families to get more sleep. It sounds pretty illogical and counterproductive then to say, well, actually, we are going to wake them up. But there are instances where waking a sleeping baby up, it's something that we don't want to do that for them and sometimes for us waking up. But that is really important if they're for nappy input and output, if there's any jaundice there, if they aren't hitting the feeds during the day, then making sure waking a baby up to feed at night time, I would recommend that in some cases too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mainly in the newborn stage. It's very rare past 3 or 4 months, I would suggest that.
Yeah.
And it's very rare that I would suggest that actually in practice, because for the majority, again, that's some but not all rule, for the majority of babies that I see in practice, feeding is going really well, which is, I think that's very encouraging and positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that's why it's important for professionals to collaborate together when they're working with families also, because, if you're making decisions about sleep and the length of time they might be able to go between feeds or to sleep, it's important to know that their feeding milestones are met. And, the same from my perspective, if they're wanting advice about routines and sleep and that sort of thing, it's important for me to know that their feeding is well established.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. Like, I think it's really important to stay in your lane, in your scope of practice. And if I worked with a family and I got a family sleep story and I thought for a second that it could be a feeding, something to do with the feeding, or it wasn't all sleep related, I would 100% wouldn't hesitate to pass them on to the appropriate practitioner. It is usually you, Stacey.
Thank you.
But one question that does come up a lot on my practice and on my approach, I don't believe that there's a set age or stage that babies can sleep. I know there's a lot of advice out there that by a set time your baby should be able to go without a certain stretch at night time without a feed. Yeah. And my take on this, and again, staying in my scope of practice, I focus on the sleep, not the feeding, but I don't put in the that a baby should do that. It's very much I feed. I think that's speed is a combination of feeding and speeding. I concentrate on the sleep, and I don't specify a certain amount of times before in between feeds, because I believe that babies they don't wear a watch, they don't worry if they can't tell the time, they're hungry when they're hungry. But it would be lovely to get your thoughts on this, because I know there is a lot of pressure on parents to get them doing a certain stretch at night time in between feeds and getting them there.
I think ultimately there's two key things that to know is that in order to maintain their growth and to be well nourished, they're going to need to take in a certain amount of calories or milk across 24 hours as an infant or a newer baby. And how they do that from the breast is so dependent on lots of things. So the mother's milk supply, the milk storage capacity, the baby being efficient and effective at feeding and removing milk. And yes, there are tweaks that we can make to maximize how much a baby can remove milk from that breast, but equally it's a very, very much a dynamic relationship that's individual both to the mother and their lactation and the infant and their ability to feed. And so it would be almost impossible to put a one size fits all approach to that. But the important thing to recognize is that there are some babies who will be able to take a lot of that milk for whatever reasons, in 16 hours of the day and sleep for the remaining 8 at very young ages. And there are equally babies and mums where that's nigh on impossible, and it has to be removed across the day and across the night. And the second thing is that when babies, particularly at night, wake, especially as they get older, not every time they wake may need to be for the complete nourishment of feeding. So yes, they will feed because it's a very good way to get babies to go back to sleep and a natural way to do that. And it's a way that you can comfort and support your baby in the night. But it may well be that those nighttime wake-ups and feeds are for sort of a 2-minute window, where actually arguably that wake up and that feed isn't required for their nutrition. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't feed them at that time. That's not what I'm saying, but it recognizes and speaks to breastfeeding, particularly in the night, but in the day as well, being more than just providing your baby or child as they get older with milk solely. And so again, that becomes really difficult to say, well, they can go this amount of time without, if actually that's your method of comfort and soothing them, because this is where I am sure you come in. If you are going to do that, they need another way of being comforted and soothed. So and for most of us, whipping out a boob is by sure the fastest way of doing that. But that doesn't mean if it's not working for you that can't be changed. But I think that's where you come in, Kerry, and you sort of take over.
I love that whip out the nip and there's lots of things there actually. First of all, I just wanted to address the one size fits all. I hate this phrase, and as you know, Stacey, I love a pun. I actually think one size absolutely sucks, because you have to look at everything. You have to look at the family, the baby, the parent. Like, there's so many different layers and moving parts to breastfeeding, feeding, sleeping, parenting, that I honestly don't believe there's this magic one size fits all. I'm really passionate about that. And then the other thing about whipping out the nip, like lots of parents, or it's mums that tell me this because they're breastfeeding, will say, I feel really lazy. I know that I'm doing I'm being lazy just getting the boob out, and I know that it's, I'm just doing what works really quickly. I know I shouldn't be doing that, but I honestly do not think there is anything wrong with ever giving them a breastfeed at night time. I really do believe that, and it's never lazy, it's never any of those things, giving in, undoing anything. I hear these things a lot of time in practice. I'm undoing things, it's lazy, I'm taking the path of least resistance. A massive part of my approach is helping families to get to where they want to be, get sleep sustainable, but also take the path of least resistance. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. So I just really wanted to stress that out. I hear that a lot from parents, mums in particular, because they're breastfeeding.
So do I. Even it just comes out in so many of my feeding consultations. Oh yes, I feed him 3 times at night or 4 times a night. I know I shouldn't feed him back to sleep every time. Just like a natural, normal thing that, it says who that you shouldn't do that. It's really a shame that that's the message in our mainstream culture. And again, it's not that if you choose not to, that's not okay. Of course it's okay if you choose not to, because you don't want, you choose not to. But certainly feeling like it's something you shouldn't do is so, it's so sad, especially because it's so biologically normal. And the reason that we pick that as our path of least resistance is because of how our bodies and babies are designed, that is how they go back to sleep. Of course, that's why we're picking it, because it works. Hello, and I know it's called the superpower, and I call it a superpower because it genuinely, is a fantastic gift and way of being able to help your baby sleep. So yeah,
completely agree. And actually, this comes up a lot, even when I'm making changes with a family overnight or whatever we're doing. We'll focus on night now because this is what we're talking about. But feeding at night time, I never, ever, ever deviate from this. If they wake up and need a feed, it is always okay to feed them back to sleep at night time. Ninja roll away, roll back over, put them in their crib, you never ever have to get your baby, have a feed, and then get them back awake. Does that make sense? It's always okay if you're feeding at night time to feed them all the way back to sleep. I'm really clear about that, because I think sometimes actually, I'm not saying nothing's impossible, because nothing ever is, but I've never ever deviated from that the whole time I've been in practice. If they're up, they're asking for feed, we give them a feed, they go back to sleep. We never ever have to stop that at night time from a sleep perspective.
If you've managed to get them back to sleep, why you would wake them up again to make them go back to sleep for different.
I know, when you say it out loud, it sounds so funny. We're laughing about it, but
I'm laughing.
I work with a lot of mums that feel real pressure. There's a lot of, again, I think it must be a myth out there that if they wake up at night time, we mustn't let them fall back to sleep on the breast after a feed, because it's a bad habit. But I do not buy into that at all.
Yeah.
They have a feed, they're fed back to sleep. If they don't feed back to sleep, then there's, we always go with the baby. We can't force them to fall asleep at the breast if they're not ready. Then I would put them down. But if they fall asleep on the boob, absolutely okay. Every single time. I do not deviate from that. And then the other thing I just wanted to talk about was stretching feeds during the day. So I get, again, I'm remembering things that come up when I'm talking to parents, that they try, is there any truth in trying to stretch the feeds during the day that they can then mimic that at night? I think I already know the answer, or what I would say, but I'd love to hear it from you.
No, and actually there would be a lot more risk in doing that both they could compromise their intake, which is a significant risk, and B, that actually they would potentially wake more at night if they're not taking in as much in the day. Because like I said to you before, how much milk a baby can take is dependent on how effective they are at removing the milk, but also each individual woman's breast milk storage capacity. And by stretching a baby longer between feeds, you're basically stimulating the breast less, which will reduce that milk supply. So if you've got a woman whose ability to keep milk in the breast, that's what breast milk storage capacity is effectively, is a smaller capacity, and this isn't about boob size, this is about milk supply within the breast, then actually the baby will only be able to remove effectively what is there. And that's why there are some babies that naturally can go longer between feeds and only feed from one breast, and other babies that feed much more often and need to feed from both breasts, because it's about that thing within the mother. And and everyone's different, and you can't have a problem with it. It's just how you are. And so you're massively compromising them if you were potentially to do that for some groups of babies. And the other group I want to mention, Kerry, if it's all right, is you need to be especially wary of stretching babies if there's a tongue tie that hasn't been divided. And I talk about this in my IGTV on tongue ties and in my blog, but basically babies that have tongue ties but that aren't causing any pain, and they've still got a decent latch, that's fantastic. But I've seen in practice some of these babies where they just really do need to be fed very responsively, and if you try and stretch them or introduce a dummy or do sleep training at night, these babies' growth can really be compromised, because they're being as efficient as they can, but there are some limitations to their efficiency. So that's a group where you need to be even more mindful if you know that they've got a tongue tie there that you've not divided, which is perfectly appropriate. You don't need to divide every tongue tie, but when you're starting to think about stretching. So I know that was a really long answer, but the bottom line is no. I mean, the other thing is I'm not really sure how you can stretch a bit. If a baby needs feeding, they need feeding, and the WHO promotes responsive feeding, breast and the bottle, which is what I also do. I mean, that's not to say if you're on your way out of the house and you're going to be somewhere else in 10 minutes and you just need to just go, and you think they're wanting a feed but you're on your way, and okay, that's fine. There might be circumstances where that needs to happen, but fundamentally no.
Thank you so much. I completely agree with you. from a sleep perspective, it's just lovely hearing it from a professional. I don't do any stretching, spacing, and I'm very, very clear about this. I don't do any stretching or spacing of feeds during the day or nighttime. I always promote responsive feeding. Apart from when life logistics happens, if your toddler's just done a poo and you've got to clear that up, or you know, something's happened, like life isn't perfect every day, as we know, like things will happen, then that's absolutely fine. But on the whole, I don't recommend doing that. And I don't understand it either, because that babies will be hungry when they're hungry. I don't understand how you would stretch them out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And actually, I don't know if we're about to move on to this now, but maybe this would be a nice sort of leap to the next sort of section of the talk. But actually, conversely to that, when I'm supporting families who are struggling with slightly older babies, 3 or 4 months old, and perhaps they're not sleeping as well at night as they had been, and perhaps they're slightly more distracted with their feeding in the day, actually I promote the opposite message, which is if they're waking really regularly at night and you're not sure if that's because in some part they're hungry, here are my strategies to help you take more milk in the day and less milk in the day, you know. So, you know, go back to offering both breasts if you weren't, you know, and tips for feeding, which I think we're going to go on to talk about. But
yes. Did you want to mention, because I've got a lot, I'm giggling away here because this really resonates with me. I call it the 4-month feed FOMO. It's definitely very, very real. Did you, before we go on to that, did you want to mention the app thing about following a routine with really young babies? Very briefly.
Yeah, just to say that, you know, again, I support lots of women who are using apps and who may also be sort of using various feeding routines that might suggest that you do an activity and then put your baby to sleep, and then when they wake up feed them, or might give you suggested times of feeds. And I would say that in the majority of cases, when there's a routine in play and I'm asked to give some support, that has been the thing that has really undone where they're at with breastfeeding. And it all goes back to what I've talked about around responsive breastfeeding. But the other thing I want to say is that there's no set time interval between feeds for a baby, and there's no set time at the breast that a baby needs to spend. And it's very much about watching your baby and not watching any sort of clock or minutes when it comes to their feeding. And one of the things with the apps that the apps can do, if you use one to record your baby's feeds, is that they can just make you overthink what's going on and really like lose yourself and lose your ability to sort of respond to your baby to a degree, cause quite a lot of stress, because you're looking and you're being like, oh my goodness, well that feed was only 13 minutes long and actually normally it's 21 minutes, and so like maybe I need to just like shove it in a few more times, and the baby doesn't want it and the baby gets fussy, and it's all come from this concept of like, you know, this app giving you these numbers. And yeah, I'd strongly suggest that unless you're being asked to monitor your baby's intake or output, both nappies and you know, time at the breast because of a growth concern or something like that, or a food diary you've been asked to keep, then actually just, you know, ditch the apps if you can. I think that, yeah, I mean, the best way of marking how long your baby's been on the boob, if you ask me, is like how long an episode on Netflix have you managed to get through? You know,
love
like
it.
20 minutes or a 40-minute one, or, you know, have you watched a whole box set and they're still on the boob? Yeah, ditch the apps. That's the best advice I can give.
Yeah, I think that's really sound and sensible advice, Stacey. I call it I have to really be careful how I say this, blocking the clock, like clock block, because I hardly ever will ask a family to write down what's happening at night time and looking at timings, because, well, one, it's very rare that I actually need that. I can't remember the last time I did that, not for a couple of years. And secondly, it is very stressful to have it written down like that. So my advice on the app is, again, some families, what works for one doesn't work for the other. Some families, you find them incredibly useful, and if they do, crack on. But if you are finding it really stressful, it's just not working for you, you're finding that they're more of a hindrance, then yeah, I would block that clock.
Absolutely, yeah. And I
should have
said that. I mean, yeah, if they're working for you and they're not causing you any stress, then okay. But just be really wary of looking at feeding from the breast in terms of minutes or intervals. As a general rule, and look and be responsive to your baby.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great advice. Cool. Are you happy to move on then to the 4-month mark?
Yeah, definitely.
This is often a biggie.
Yeah.
So who wants to start? Do you want to start, or shall I start, Stacey?
I don't mind.
I don't mind either. We're far too polite.
Go on, you get started.
Okay, so sleep at the 4-month mark. I don't believe sleep is linear. So I don't believe that at a set age or stage it's going to go backwards or forwards. I believe that they don't get to a certain stretch or a certain number of feeds and they stay there. Sleep is an ebb and flow process. And again, quite often there's this expectation that we can teach them or train them to get to a certain amount of hours at night time or a set night, and then it's going to stay there. Your baby constantly changing as they're growing in development, so do their sleep and their sleep needs as well. But around the 4-month mark, it could be as young as 3.5 months, or sometimes as old as 4.5, 5 months, your baby will go through the 4-month progression or regression. I know that I use that term because that's what families are most familiar with, and it is the biggest change to their sleep. They're learning a completely new way of sleeping. Before then, they didn't have sleep cycles. It was all one type of sleep deep, and then as they transition into the 4-month mark, they start having lighter sleep cycles to go with the deep sleep. And this is where the sleeps, I'm sure most people are familiar with sleep cycles. This is where your baby starts cycling between sleep. So it's a really massive change for your baby because they are physically learning a whole new way of sleeping at night time. It's like any new skill. When we start doing something new, it takes practice and patience. For example, if we are learning a new recipe or we're driving a new route, for the first couple of times, we need to keep checking the map or checking the sat nav or keep checking the recipe. And then as we start to become more familiar with it, practicing patience and time, we don't need to do that. And then we get the hang of it. And I really like to, I love that analogy with baby sleep. It just takes time. You can't teach them through the 4-month mark. It's just practice, patience, and supporting them in how to sleep in this new way. And whilst they're doing it, the impact on sleep is you might notice your baby wakes up more frequently during the day. And at night time, I call it the 4-month feed FOMO, where during the day now they just, I often find parenting can be, and babies can be, that push me, pull me, like they want to come on the breast, like they're hungry, they want it, they want that closeness, but also, oh, what's going on over there? I really want to go and have a look and have a nose around. So quite often during this stage, I've noticed that they can get quite fussy at the breast. They might go through a nursing strike. They might just have so much going on because for babies, the first time everything they see, it's the first time. It must be amazing for them. It's just every day is just a completely new experience for them. And sometimes life can be just a bit too busy and they don't want to focus on their feeds. So that's what I've noticed around that mark.
Yeah, so definitely in terms of feeding, what you've just pointed out is one of the things that happens around exactly the same window, actually, around 4 months, but as early as 3 and as late as 5. And it is this idea that they become a lot more aware of the world around them. They're more distracted. They're more interested to see what's going on. And they'll come on the breast to satisfy a thirst or a hunger, or to come close, to be sort of close and connect with their mum. But it may well be a fairly short-lived feed, and because something else catches their attention, or a sibling in the room, or they're a bus stop, and there's new noises.
Yeah.
And the second thing actually that happens similarly as the baby progresses really is that they become more efficient at breastfeeding, assuming that everything is going well, and they become a lot better at removing the milk much faster. And so this is where, you know, ditching the app is helpful, because it may well be that your baby at this age can remove the same amount of milk in a handful of minutes as they were removing as a newborn during, you know, 40-minute feed. And what happens is we don't trust this because we don't trust ourselves, maybe not educated, and it coincides with what's happening potentially at night. So automatically, instead of us sort of going with the flow or whatever, we're looking to try and fix it, you know, and we don't trust that actually that is all okay and our baby's still doing okay, and we can just go back to checking wet and dirty nappies and those sorts of things. And we start to distrust ourselves and think about our supply, or our baby's broken, or maybe they've got reflux and they're aversive of the breast, and all these different types of things is what I hear people say. You know, I think that they've got colic now because they'll only feed for a short amount of time and then they cry a lot at the breast. But actually, when you unpick it, a lot of times they're crying at the breast because they are done, but we don't believe that they're done. And, you know, and again, often it's in the midst of another wave of quite a lot of sleep deprivation from the parents, which make it really hard. And this idea that, you know, of course, you know, your baby needs to be taking in all the milk that they need over 24 hours. So, you know, maybe they're waking up, you know, regularly because they're hungry and they're not feeding as much in the day. But that's not necessarily, and actually it's often very rarely the case. It's these developmental changes that they're making. And I certainly find that like a lot of my clients approach me at this sort of age because it's a really can be quite a really tough time, to be honest. Doubting yourself, doubting everything really, and being super tired at the same time.
It really highlights how breastfeeding and bed and sleep are so closely linked, doesn't it? Everything's linked.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, in these early days, that's sort of your job, isn't it? Like, this is what you do, you feed them, and they, you know, this is what they do, they feed, they sleep, and then they have these very short periods where they're sort of awake. And so there's a huge amount of pressure on those two things, and, you know, we're probably hyper alert to them in these early sort of months. Once they get bigger and they start to do more, it becomes less intense, both of those things, I think. But yeah, you can definitely see the interplay between them and why they're such a powerful focus for families, and why, you know, there are a lot of industries that capitalize, you know, on those, both professionals like ourselves who are there to provide support, but equally a lot of stuff just in the public domain, whether it be products and fixes and apps and various other things that help, you know, or are designed to help, not always, both sleep and feeding.
Yeah, no, I agree. I hear that a lot. My baby's broken. I just want to reassure you, babies are never broken and they don't need fixing. I think and I definitely am a fixer. I think it's natural to go straight into that fixing mode. If something isn't working, I call it Amazon Prime patience. If it's not coming straight away, or if it's not moving forward straight away, there's always that temptation to fix it and try and tinker around with it. And a massive part of my practice is really support it. It's so hard to trust because there's lots of noise outside, but really quietening down that noise, trusting yourself, trusting your baby, and giving it that time, because giving it time, 9 times out of 10, it settles all by itself. And actually trying to fix something constantly, or we thinking something needs fixing, or forcing it, that can often be more frustrating.
Do you know, Carrie, that's exactly my experience too. And actually often the families come to me after they've tried to fix things, but the fixing has actually only served to either increase the stress and anxiety or the doubt. But again, it's about people like us, you know, trying our best to educate mums and families as to what is normal and how to expect these changes. In fact, I'm going to be rolling out a webinar for just this. So it's going to be actually for mums who have had their babies, but it's all about what to expect in feeding for the first 6 months. So not establishing breastfeeding, because a lot of families get that support antenatally, but like assuming that you've established it, navigating through all these stages, because we're not given this information, and it makes it really hard. So certainly not judging any families that are trying to find fixes for what they assume is a baby that's no longer feeding as well, for example, when they don't know any different because they can't access that information.
Yeah, so important. So important. Fixing is very frustrating. I think there's something, it can be so difficult, but surrendering to it, accepting that some things, I don't believe there is ever a quick fix for anything. I really don't. And sometimes accepting that can often, some parents, honestly, just because they don't need a paid consultation, they don't need a consultant, they just need someone to hear them, to reassure them and give them that confirmation that, you've been heard, this is natural, this is normal, and that then gives them the confidence then to carry on and listen to themselves. So half the time I will have a chat with parents, we don't even book anything in, because they just needed that confidence and that confirmation to do it.
Yeah, and I think we were talking earlier, weren't we, Carrie? And there are some little tweaks that maybe aren't fixes that you can potentially employ at this age and stage that might give you your confidence back, and help you feel, I guess, confident that they're feeding as well as they can be in the day and sleeping as well as they can be in the day, and making that all work for you whilst being responsive to your baby, so that you're going to get the best night that you're going to get, in keeping with where your baby is clearly at developmentally.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing, sleep-wise at this stage, I wouldn't recommend making any massive changes, because they're going through a change. So then introducing another massive change on top of that, it's just change carnage. Like, no one's going to move forward, and it's going to be much harder than it really needs to be. And again, it's not lazy, but taking that path of least resistance, it comes up a lot for me. And probably for sleep, all I would do at this age is just come and check your basics. So just make sure that we're having the opportunity for nap and rest during the day. You've got a really solid bedtime routine. They might not be calm in the bedtime routine, but it's a calm-ish environment. Parents are calm, making sure at night time that we are responding to their needs, giving them that practice and patience to learn how to wake up, get back to sleep. If they're not asking for support at night time, like they're not crying, or they're what I call emotionally easy, my suggestion would be, if it doesn't go against your instincts, or they don't need feeding, would be to just take a breathe and take a step back and see what they're doing before going in. That can be helpful, because again, new skill takes time, it needs practice and patience for them to get the hang of it. And then for the feed FOMO, all I would ever suggest at this stage is taking them somewhere calm and quiet to feed during the night, during the day. So taking them somewhere calm, quiet during the day if you can. Some parents have actually found like taking them into a darkened room can help get them to feed. But again, I wouldn't let that become, if we get to the stage where you feel that it's becoming forced or it's starting to get frustrating, I would always park it. And then the other one is just keep offering more feeds during the day, give them that opportunity to feed during the day. And quite often, all by itself, just given a little bit of time, most cases will, family, sorry, that sounded awful. I didn't mean that your family is a case, but in most cases, it does settle by itself.
Yeah, I mean, I give very similar feeding advice. Again, you don't have to do it, but if you wanted to feel more reassured or confident that your baby has had maybe a slightly longer feed, you can build that around when they're due a nap. You can do it in a quiet room, and you can feed them to sleep, because typically they tend to be longer feeds, and or feeding them to wake. So, keeping an eye out for when they start to stir from a nap. Easy if they're on you, if they're napping on you, but if they're on in a crib or something, just keeping a little eye on the crib, and that as they start to stir, waking them up and feeding them to wake can be nice, but not in a way that causes, any pressure that you feel like you're wed to the bedroom to have to do this. But if it will reassure you and make you feel better, then it's okay to do it once or twice a day. And the other thing is that sometimes you can, there's a lot of myths around, baby needs to feed for a certain amount of time to empty the breast, and fore milk and hind milk, and I'm not even going to go there with that in this chat. However, if your baby started having much shorter feeds, but they typically used to only feed from one side, go back to offering them a second breast, and they may well feed the second breast, even though they're used to. So that's another tip for me. And just maximizing when they feed best. So like looking at Kerry's stuff around nap gaps, knowing when a good window for a sleep might be, and then offering them the breast to feed them to sleep.
Yeah, makes total sense. I think that's very, very, again, sound and very sensible advice. I was going to ask you something about the 4 month mark, and it's just completely gone. Maybe it'll come back. No, it's completely gone. Oh, that's so annoying. Oh, so annoying. We've talked about surrendering, baby's never broken, there's no quick fix. Oh, yeah, I think it was just to reiterate what we were saying about the forcing and the fixing. Like, I think it's fine to make these tweaks. Like, I completely agree. We were talking about this before, weren't we, Stacey, that quite often there are some little tweaks or some little changes that you can put in place. I call them sleep suggestions, that can help to make a difference. But again, I don't feel that there's any quick fix. And as soon as anything starts becoming stressful, forced, or a parent or the baby's getting frustrated, I would park it and go back to what you were doing before. Because when you're stressed, you're in fight or flight mode, your baby's in fight or flight mode, they're not conducive for feeding, and for both feeding and sleeping, actually. Like, no one's going to fall asleep or have a really decent feed once they get to that point.
Definitely. It's like a tricky message and balance, I guess, between what we're saying, which is actually this is all really normal, therefore you don't need to do anything to fix it, but recognizing that just saying it's really normal and you should struggle and suffer through it if it's really debilitating, if it's causing you stress, despite it being normal, which often is the case, that there are a few little things to try, but really only if they're going to help, not hinder. That's sort of the message it sounds like we're both giving from a normal developmental change around this period with both sleep and breastfeeding.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I call it having a bed break. Like, if something is like you're trying to get your baby down for a nap, I don't know whether it'd be the same for a feed. I'd like to hear your take on it. It's always okay to stop, take a break, stop doing what you're doing, go into another room, go outside, start doing something different. Like, take a break from it, pause it, 10-15 minutes later, try again.
Yeah, it's slightly different with feeding, because I would just sort of say to be responsive to your baby. So if you think your baby wants to feed and you offer the breast and they don't want it, that's it, you're done, and wait till they show you another cue or try again later. I think the risk with that sort of approach with feeding is sort of getting lost in whose cues are they and who's wanting this baby to feed at this time, which is different to the naps, when I think that they, there certainly do need to have naps at certain intervals or times, from what I understand, across the day. So I think with the sleep, with the feeding, it would be more like, offer your baby the breast if you think they want it, or offer if you think they haven't fed for a while, but just once, and if they don't want it, then move on and watch them for more cues. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Cool. And then what was the last thing going back to work, should we briefly touch on this? Do you want to, or it's up to you? It's completely up to you. I feel we've covered absolutely loads, but if you wanted to talk about how to, because that is I get asked that a lot, maybe that would be a separate podcast. It's quite a big topic. So I wonder whether we sort of stop here with the sort of sleep and feeding, and maybe I can come back and talk about that.
You are definitely welcome anytime, Stacey. Absolutely. I think that would be a whole other, there's a lot to go through there.
Because
I agree.
With probably sleep and feeding, when you're thinking about going back to work, will they nap at nursery? How long can I go without feeding? Feeding, do I need to pump? There's probably loads in that topic about both areas.
No, you are completely right. I would love you to come back on and talk about that, because I do think that would be a whole other episode in itself, and one that would be very, very useful.
Pop it on the list, Kerry.
Oh, my list is getting longer and longer, but I will do. Is there anything else, Stacey? Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. It's been absolutely lovely talking to you. I've definitely learned some things, and will be learned some things that I can go and take into my practice. I don't mean that I will be offering feeding advice, because I won't, but definitely reminder for me for things going into practice. Is there anything else you would like to talk about? You mentioned your webinar, actually. Did you want to talk a little bit more about the webinar, or shall I put that in the show notes?
Pop it in the show notes, but it's just to say that I will be launching that at some point when I get round to it.
I've had this older, like an infant sleep course on my webinar for ages, and I just haven't got around to do it. It's terrible, but it is all. If you're listening and you're looking for sleep help for older children, it is coming. I promise. It's just my list gets longer and longer and longer. Cool. Any last words of wisdom from you, Stacey? I've really enjoyed your little pearls.
Thank you very much. No, I think that sort of covers, I think, what I wanted to talk about when it came to feeding and sleep.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Stacey. It's been absolutely lovely talking to you. That time has just whipped past. I've loved it. And yes, I'm really looking forward to having you back on the Sleep Show soon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Kerry. I look forward to coming back again.
You're welcome. Yay. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to me, your host, Kerry Secker, on the Carrot Out Sleep Show. I really hope you found the podcast reassuring, informative, and a little bit fun. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe to the show below, and I'd be so grateful if you could leave me some fabulous feedback. I always love hearing from you, and one lucky listener will win lifetime access to my Bedtime Basics e-course every single month. My next podcast episode will be out in 2 weeks' time, but if you can't wait for more of my sleep shizzle, you can find me over on Instagram at Carrot Out Sleep Consultant. I update my sleep squares and speak sleep there on the daily. Big love and sleep solidarity to you all.